Hello, this is Jerry Beck, and welcome to the Cartoon Research podcast on the Cartoon Research Twitch page. And today we have a special guest. We're going to talk about 3D cartoons and just going to have a casual conversation all about it. And my guest today is Eric Kurland, who's a good friend of mine. And Eric has a history not only with 3D, he is the 3D expert as far as I'm concerned, but also Eric has worked in animation in maybe one or two capacities. You could tell us a little bit more about. Let's start there anyway.
Sure.
Yeah.
Jerry, thanks so much for inviting me to be here today. I'm thrilled to be part of your Twitch here.
Thank you.
So I've kind of had my toe in the animation world for a while, and 3D is something that I've been passionate about ever since I was a kid. A few years back, I started a nonprofit organization called 3D Space, and I operate a museum of 3D here in Los Angeles.
Definitely tell us about that, maybe now and also toward the end. It's a physical, like, little museum. It's a storefront, really.
Yeah. It's sort of a secret museum. It's in a basement in the Echo Park neighborhood of Los Angeles.
Right.
I like to call it sort of my version 1.0 of the museum. The goal is to eventually have a proper place with a theater and a classroom and library and all. For now, it's a gallery space where I do rotating exhibits, and there are some pieces in the collection that are animation related that
we'll talk about
a little bit later. Yeah.
And you also have worked in visual effects? Is that another thing that you do?
I when I first came to California, this was back in 1994, I found myself working for a company called Cambridge Animation Systems. They did a digital ink and paint software package called Animo that was, I guess, sort of a commercial competitor to Disney's CAPS system. And back when Warner Brothers launched their feature animation studio, and that was followed right after by DreamWorks Animation, both of those studios were using the Animo software. So I actually kind of went from the frying pan right into the fire, working on features for Warner Brothers and DreamWorks.
And you worked originally on, I want to hear which features you worked on, but you worked on the original Space Jam, right?
I did tech support on the original Space Jam. They were using the Animo software. There was actually, I guess, the first feature project to be released that had used that software. So I spent quite a lot of time representing the software company at Warner Brothers, training all the department heads and jumping from the scanning department to the scene planning department to the ink and paint department, and making sure that everything was running smoothly there.
Did you actually work for Warner's or DreamWorks, or did you work for Animo?
Initially I worked for Animo, and then after Space Jam, I actually got an offer to go over to Warner Brothers and work in the color model department. So I was a color modelist for Quest for Camelot, and got to do a lot of really interesting effects shots that would come into the color department. It was a really great learning experience. I got to work directly with the art director to take stuff that was coming in from the effects animators and stuff coming in from the character animators and the backgrounds, and marry it all together using this new digital software. It was really cool.
Was 3D a hobby of yours at that time? Just something you were fascinated in? Or
yeah,
how you got from working in animation to being this 3D animation specialist?
Sure. Okay, well, um, I've worn glasses since I was about 3 years old, and I'm very, very nearsighted. My right eye is stronger. And I guess sometime when I was around 5, my parents got me a ViewMaster. Yeah, you remember the ViewMaster?
Oh,
You
I
put them
have
up there
one
to like
sitting around here
look through.
somewhere. Yeah.
So I have hundreds of them sitting around here. I should grab one. Um, but yeah, so I got a ViewMaster, and I would always close my left eye because it was my weaker eye. So
Hmm.
I was only looking at one of the two pictures, and I didn't realize that they were 3D.
Oh.
And then I guess maybe I was about 7, and I don't know why, but I opened my left eye while I was looking into the ViewMaster.
Yeah.
And here, I can show you the picture that I was looking at. Let me
Let's
do
try
this.
this.
Okay, so this this was the picture I was looking at.
Oh yeah, how cool. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
So you can
obviously
see it,
Popeye.
it's Popeye.
Oh, why is that on? Okay, that should not be on. Oops. Sorry about
So
that.
okay,
We'll get to that
so
later.
so yes,
I promise you.
this is this is the picture I was looking at, and um, here, let me do this.
Hmm.
So when I opened my left eye and I looked
Hmm.
at this picture of Popeye and Olive, it literally popped into depth, and I had like this revelation that, oh my God, this is how you're supposed to look at ViewMasters.
Right.
And I remember running around the house to find every reel that I had to see if they all did this.
Right.
But yeah, I kind of owe my initial love for 3D to this Popeye reel.
That's really
Um,
cool.
and
The um, what I'm jumping around a little bit because I'm fascinated with your career with like you've been with the Simpsons a little bit. I don't know how long you were with them, but you did a lot of interesting stuff for the
Yeah,
Simpsons.
yeah. Well, after working at Warner Brothers and DreamWorks,
Mm-hmm.
in their feature divisions, um, the studios all made a move to CGI rather than traditionally hand drawn, and I found myself looking for other things to do,
Mm-hmm.
and at that point, um, digital 3D, digital stereoscopic 3D was just sort of starting to become a possibility. People were, hacking together pairs of cameras and shooting 3D videos. And I found this enthusiast community here in LA. There's an LA 3D club that's been um, meeting consistently since 1955.
Mm-hmm.
And I found this club. I started going to their meetings, and uh, I met a gentleman named Ray Zone. Ray was known as the king of 3D comic books,
Right.
and was a historian, author, filmmaker, and expert in like everything 3D. And Ray kind of took me under his wing, uh, mentored me in all this 3D stuff, and taught me like all the techniques that he was using to do 3D comic book conversions.
Mm-hmm.
And um, with my film background and this new 3D stuff I was learning, I thought, here's something that I can maybe experiment with and figure out how to do. So in 2000, I think it was 2006, when Chicken Little came out, and
Right.
Disney pushed for the installation of digital projection in theaters. And part of how they did that was pushing that Chicken Little would be 3D, so theaters would
Right.
need to upgrade to show Chicken Little.
Right.
And I'd already been dabbling in this for a while, which kind of put me a little bit ahead of the curve, um, for understanding how stereoscopic 3D worked. Um, uh, I ended up working on a bunch of 3D music videos and did stuff with um, the viral video band OK Go, and eventually I got a call from one of the producers at The Simpsons,
Uh-huh.
and he said that they were um, working on a theatrical short that was going to be released with the Fox movie Ice Age 4. This was in 2012,
Right.
and they said that they had a very, very short production timeline to get this short film finished, and they weren't quite sure how in-house they could actually make it stereoscopic.
Hmm.
So they asked me if I would come in, spend a couple days looking at their art, and see if I had any suggestions for how they could, create a 3D version of it. And I went in, and they gave me a scene to play around with, and I showed it to them, and they said, "Well, would you like to come in and work on this?" So they actually hired me at The Simpsons to be the lead stereographer on what was the Maggie Simpson in the Longest Daycare.
Right.
So I worked on that for several months. It was great. David Silverman directed it. It was a pet project of his. The whole thing is effectively a silent film. There's no dialogue. It's all Maggie Simpson doing a very sort of Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton performance.
Right.
And
Was this the first? Was this the first 2D hand-drawn animation converted to 3D in the digital age, or am I missing something?
Mm, traditional hand drawn?
Yeah, as opposed to Ice Age or Toy
Yeah,
Story.
no. Actually, there had been several before. In fact,
In the digital age.
in the digital age, yeah. Ray Zone back in 2008, 2009 did a 3D conversion on an animated feature that was produced in Mexico City.
Huh. Do you know the name of it?
Yeah, it was called Brijes, Brijes, Brijes 3D.
Never heard of it. And that was a hand-drawn animated feature.
Yeah, it was a hand-drawn animated feature, and Ray
and
went down to Mexico City.
You said conversion. Now, there's a difference between conversion and maybe being 3D from the outset, right?
Yeah. Essentially, if you're doing the 3D work in the post-production process, what you're doing is you're taking what's been created as flat artwork, and like, for instance, what Ray would do when he was converting a comic book, what I did on The Simpsons, we took the artwork as it was drawn, as it was created, and used that as what you would see in your left eye.
Right.
And the reason that we see 3D, the reason we see the world in 3D, is because our eyes are set about 2.5 inches apart.
Right.
And our brains are really good at interpreting the differences, those parallax perspective differences between what our left and right eye sees, all get interpreted into depth when our brain fuses the two together. So if you take that hand-drawn animation and consider that to be the left eye view, and then shift and warp and manipulate it to create what would be the matching perspective for the right eye view,
right,
you can trick your brain into seeing the depth in those two images.
But did you have to create new artwork for the right eye, so to speak?
In a sense, yes, but we're starting with the hand-drawn artwork that we're using for the left eye.
Right.
So in the case of The Simpsons, what I would do, if I wanted something to appear to be further away from the screen, I would shift things in the right eye more to the right. So your left eye would see things more to the left, your right eye would see things more to the right. And if you think about that, that would be when your eyes go more to parallel, and when your eyes are parallel, you're looking off to the distance. If I wanted something to be coming forward, I would move something in the right eye to the left, so that your left eye sees it.
Right, I get it.
And your eyes are more crossed, more converged, which is what you do when things are closer to you. And it's all in your head that you're seeing depth in it, because it really is just two flat images.
That Maggie Simpson short, was it designed to be in 3D at all, or they just decided to make it in 3D later?
Initially, it wasn't. My understanding was that it had actually been in development for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess, if you look at typically when Fox put out an Ice Age movie, they had a short that was also done by Blue Sky.
Right.
You had those, what was it? Scrat the Squirrel would go after acorns.
Right.
But when Ice Age 4 was coming out, they came to The Simpsons and said, well, that short you've had in development for 2 years, we want to put that out theatrically with Ice Age 4, but you have to make it 3D.
Wow.
So they were already, they were already in production. They'd done some tests, but they hadn't really worked out a whole process for it. So what they ended up doing...
Was there anything in that short that was 3D? Like they threw something at the screen or something?
Well, my first day on that show, I met the director, and his first question to me was, how are we going to make this 3D but still look like The Simpsons? And he had never done anything stereoscopic before, so he wasn't quite sure what the language should be to describe what he wanted it to look like.
Right.
I actually told him, instead of thinking about it as a 3D movie, get rid of the screen. Think of it as a proscenium stage, and the edges of the frame are your wings. So things can be behind the wings and they can come out onto the stage, and then you can put things anywhere you want on that stage. And then imagine that you have a runway that extends off that stage right up to the audience members' eyes. You never have to put anything on the runway if you don't want to, but it's there if you ever want to use it. And like a light bulb went off over David's head, and he said, wait, so I can talk to you like I'm blocking a play? And I said, yeah, exactly. And he said, oh, we're going to get along great. And that's how he did it. He'd say, I want Maggie to start upstage and then come up to the table, or have this come in from the wings and then go into the audience. So he was able to talk about it that way, and I was able to translate that into what's on screen. So to answer your question, he was then able to come up with some gags based on what they had done. There's a scene where unibrow baby Gerald, he's the villain of the piece, and they're testing all the children at the daycare center to see if they have lice.
Right.
And Maggie passes the test just fine, and then they test unibrow baby, and of course he's swarming with lice. And so we had a few lice pop off of his head into the audience. Then we went down to the Fox lot and we screened it for the producers, and of course that's when Matt Groening said, we need more lice. So we ended up putting like hundreds of lice. And he said, we want it to come so far out into the audience that like it looks like it's falling on the head of the person in front of you.
Perfect.
So we did it. If you get to ever see that in 3D, the lice was a really fun gag to do. And actually, we took that short, and a couple of years later, um, we expanded on that. We did um, a 4D theater project for an entertainment place in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. This was done through the what is it? The iWorks Motion Theater Company.
Right.
So
is that Simpsons attraction still playing in that Myrtle Beach?
Yeah. I've looked it up recently, and I think it may have just reopened after COVID.
Right.
But yeah, they have a whole thing there where you enter the Aztec Theater lobby, and they have stand-ups of all the characters in tuxedos. You're there for a movie premiere, and then you go into the motion theater, and you sit in one of these seats that moves around, and they spray water on you, and they shoot bubbles into the theater. And
what do they do when the lice come on?
I believe they have little things that like blow on your neck, and
that's cool.
Tickle your feet. And we added a few additional gags for that. There's a scene where we added like a kid blowing bubbles, and they have bubbles come into the theater. And for that, we took a segment from an existing Simpsons episode. There's an episode where Bart and Milhouse discover an underground subway, an abandoned underground subway, and Bart gets the subway car running and causes earthquakes. And they thought that might be a fun way to expand and have things that they could rumble the seats and all of that for. So
you had to convert that episode, that old one, into 3D.
Yeah. We took the Maggie Simpson short. We took that old episode and converted that to 3D, and we bridged it all together with some brand new animation of Homer in a tuxedo talking to the audience.
Wow, that you can only see in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
It's the only place you can see it. Yeah,
not even at Universal. I want to skip ahead a little bit, but in a nutshell, did you also do new 3D animation for Universal theme parks, or
I didn't do any of the Universal stuff.
You did work on that virtual reality.
Yes.
Couch gag.
Yeah. I
tell us quickly about that. Yeah.
Sure. Several years ago, when Google was promoting their Google Cardboard virtual reality viewer,
right?
They launched a division called Google Spotlight Stories.
Right.
And Google Spotlight Stories was spearheaded by Jan Pinkova.
Yep.
And they were approaching some of the greatest animation directors in the business and having them create really amazing 360 animated experiences.
Right.
Glenn Keane did one.
Right.
And they came to The Simpsons and said, we would love to do a Simpsons VR experience.
Cool.
And so David Silverman directed that one as well. And we took a couch gag called Planet of the Couches, sort of Planet of the Apes, but instead of apes, it's a world where humans are imprisoned by couches. And we had to, from scratch, figure out how do we actually animate 5 minutes of animation in a way that it's 360 degrees and there's something happening everywhere. So
Right.
wherever you look, there's something new to discover. Um, and it was a real challenge for the animators because we had to come up with these crazy layouts that were like built on
I
all
can't.
six sides of a cube, and
I
then we
can't
had
even
to wrap
imagine
that
it.
cube onto a
Yeah.
sphere. Really crazy stuff, and the edges all had to line up, and so we would create all of this 360-degree animation, and then Google had a way to track what you're looking at, so that if you look at Mo, then it would trigger Mo's dialogue. So
Wow.
Mo wouldn't say anything until you actually looked at him.
Right.
Really, really neat stuff.
Right.
Um,
I want to say that
and
I've seen this, and it's amazing. I don't know how anybody can see it anymore. Or even then, I think it was hard to see. But I think it was available, right? It was somehow available.
yeah. Oh, yeah. The Google Spotlight Stories app. I'd have to check, but I think you can still download
Yeah.
the app if you have an Android phone.
It's pretty amazing.
That division at Google ceased operations, but I'm pretty sure the app is still available.
You literally are in the world of The Simpsons. Literally, you're standing in it, and anywhere you look, you can see a gag. That's the thing. You not only see something, but there's a joke. It's like being in Mad Magazine. It's pretty incredible.
Well, and one of the really fun things with it is the experience is a little different every time based on where you look.
Oh my god.
So
yeah.
so like there's one scene in it where if you never turn to the right, you'll never see what happens over there, and that triggers something different.
Man.
And I mean I'm really proud of the work I did with The Simpsons. The Maggie theatrical short got an Oscar nomination, and that VR project it garnered one of the first Emmy nominations for virtual reality.
Wow. It should have won.
And one other interesting project that I worked on for The Simpsons, that it's not 3D, but I got to work on one episode. Most of what I did for The Simpsons were special projects, things that were secondary to the show itself. But I did get to work on one episode.
Yeah.
It's the episode where Homer becomes an improv comic.
Okay.
And at the end of the episode, Homer actually took live phone calls over the air on Fox.
Huh. Oh.
And we used Adobe Character Animator software to do real-time animation.
Real-time improv animation.
Yeah. We I was brought in to learn how to use the software, and again worked with David Silverman. He was directing it, and I basically created this digital, I guess you could call it a puppet version of Homer. It was the animators created animated clips of everything Homer might do, and I built this puppet using the Adobe software, and we got this big keyboard, and I tied each one of these things that Homer could do to a different key on the keyboard. And then the software also had automatic mouth placement, so it would listen to whatever you say and then choose from a library of mouth shapes. So we created mouths for every pose that Homer might be in.
Wow.
And then on the day of the broadcast, down on the Fox lot, Dan Castellaneta was in a sound booth, and David Silverman was in the control room with this keyboard. And they took live phone calls. Dan would respond on air to the caller, and that would drive the mouth. And David played the keyboard almost like a musical instrument to animate Homer.
Wow.
really amazing. And we did it live twice. We did it live for the East Coast, and then we did it again live for the West Coast.
I have to see that episode. I've never seen. Is Homer drawn 2D, or is he three dimensional, or like
No,
CG?
Homer was drawn 2D. It was all done exactly the way that everything else in the episode was done. The only difference is we used this real-time system to select how
Wow.
he would move, and to also we animated lots of other characters coming in and doing things. So like,
Right.
at one point, Lisa comes in and does a little gag, and that could be triggered with a key press. At one point, Bart runs in and knocks the walls down to reveal Marge and Maggie sitting on the couch behind Homer. And that was all stuff that it was all pre-animated, but it could all be triggered at the right
Right.
times. So a really interesting thing. And then we used that same technique a couple years later to do all of this interactive animation for the Simpsons Las Vegas slot machine. So if you go to casinos in Vegas and you see the Simpsons slot machine, all that animation that was in there was actually, we created these virtual puppets of all the characters, and then anything they might possibly do. And again, David Silverman played them like a musical instrument to animate them.
Wow. All right, going to Vegas. Let's talk about the old days and the original animation in 3D. In the old,
Sure,
far back.
sure.
Now, obviously, there was a kind of a golden age in the 1950s. When the big 3D craze, the fad of 1952,
Yeah.
53,
Yeah.
54. What was? Let's this for the record. I'm racking my brain. Was the Norman McLaren? Didn't he do a 3D experimental
Yes,
film
yeah.
in the 40s? Right.
Well, yeah, yeah. Well, a little bit later. Rolling back,
Yeah.
for people who aren't aware, stereoscopic 3D actually goes all the way back to 1838. It's 1 year older than photochemical photography. So there was a
Okay.
British scientist named Sir Charles Wheatstone. Um, Electrical engineers are very familiar with him for some of his inventions. But what a lot of people don't necessarily know is that he was the first person to publish a theory of how we see the world in depth because we have two eyes.
Hmm.
And he's actually the one who came up with the word stereoscopic,
Wow.
which scopic mean it's from the Greek. Scopic means to see, and stereo actually means solid or in relief.
Oh.
It doesn't mean two.
Doesn't
it
mean
means
two.
solid.
Oh.
So like in ancient Greece, they would have used stereo to describe sculpture.
Huh.
So it's
That makes sense.
essentially
Yeah.
Wheatstone took it to mean to see something in relief.
Right.
And to prove his theory, he actually built a device that you'd put your face right up to these two mirrors that were at 45-degree angles, and then he drew two pictures of geometric shapes from two different perspectives, and he put one picture on one side and one picture on the other side. Your eyes would see the two, and then you'd see the geometric shape in relief. So that was his proof. So we actually had stereoscopic drawings before we had stereoscopic pictures,
Right.
photos.
And okay, and okay, I get that,
So-
because there were all kinds of devices and toys that were made back in the 1800s for people to watch stereo images.
Now they weren't moving pictures yet, but we did have stereo drawings, and then that, of course, photography became a viable process in the 1850s. So by the 1860s, you had stereoscopes and stereo view cards with pairs of photographic images that was like the home entertainment system of the day. And that was very popular through the whole Victorian period, and then into the 20th century. As people started leaving their homes to go to the Nickelodeons and the cinemas, the idea of looking at pictures at home fell out of favor. But there were attempts back then to do stereoscopic movies, or at least stereoscopic sequences of images.
Right.
And the first 3D movie shown to an audience was actually in 1915.
That was intended to be a 3D movie.
Yes.
Okay.
There's
'Cause
been
we know there's
that.
some unintentional live action 3D, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. There'd been various experiments and accidental 3D.
Right.
The French filmmaker Georges Méliès filmed a number of his films using two cameras that were linked together on one crank. Now, he was doing it so that he could send one negative to his brother in New York, and then they could make prints and release them in New York and Paris at the same time.
Right.
But he unintentionally ended up shooting 3D films.
Right.
So, and he was a pioneer of on-screen effects, stopping the camera, changing things, some very primitive animation. So, in a sense, he was maybe the first person to do any kind of accidental 3D animation on screen.
When was it discovered that Méliès made these 3D? Again, it was a mistake. It was an accident, not a mistake, but it was a.
Oh yeah.
It wasn't made intentionally in 3D. But when was that discovered? I mean, who?
It was a rather recent discovery. It was just a few years ago. Film preservationist Serge Bromberg with Lobster Films in Paris was doing a restoration on a Méliès film, and he was missing some scenes that, as it turned out, I believe the Library of Congress had a print that had those scenes in it. So Serge arranged to get a digital copy of the Library of Congress print with the intention of cutting the missing parts of his print and filling in the gaps from their print. But when he did that, he noticed that the camera angle changed.
Wow.
And it occurred to him that this was done with two different cameras, but the synchronization seems to be dead on.
Wow.
So he took the overlapping sections from what the Library of Congress had and what he had, and lined them up and looked at them. Digital allowed him to look at them using 3D glasses, and sure enough, they were stereoscopic.
Right. But
So
we should plug. I don't have the name of it, but Serge made a documentary on Méliès that just came out, which
that's right.
played at the TCM Festival, and I believe it may possibly still be on HBO Max. It's a Méliès documentary narrated by Leonard Maltin, and you'll find out why Leon Schlesinger played a role in preserving the Méliès films. So I highly recommend you seeking out this documentary on Méliès that was just made. It's 2021 release, so look for that.
Yeah, that's a brilliant documentary.
It is.
I learned quite a lot about it. Everyone knows Georges Méliès, but I was not familiar with his brother,
Right.
who had come to New York and had his own film career. Very,
Right.
very interesting stuff.
Yeah. So,
but to
drawn
get
at.
to
I'm
what you
gonna
were
stick to animation.
yeah,
though.
to get you what you were saying before, I'll jump forward. There were attempts at 3D movies in the 1920s. There were some shorts in the 1930s done at MGM.
Oh, there was also, but in animation, there was that film made for the World's Fair about putting the car together,
And
What,
yes,
auto rhythm
yeah,
or
yeah.
something, motor rhythm. Yeah.
There were two versions of it. At the New York World's Fair in 1939,
Yeah.
at the Chrysler Pavilion, they hired a filmmaker, animator, and 3D specialist named John Norling to make a promotional film for Chrysler. And what they did was a stop motion short that runs about 10 minutes of a Chrysler car magically assembling itself, set to music. And this was shown in the Chrysler Pavilion. It was actually the first, or one of the first publicly shown films to use polarized projection. Prior to that, if you wanted to show a 3D movie, you had to use red and blue or red and green glasses. But the Polaroid company had developed polarizing filters initially as something to put on car headlights to cut the light. But Edwin Land had this idea that it could also be used to project a 3D image, because you could project through two different projectors, one with the left image, one with the right image, through opposingly angled polarizing filters. And then if you wore glasses that had the same polarizing filters and you projected onto a reflective silver screen, your left eye would only see the light from the left projector, your right eye would only see the light from the right projector. So they introduced this at the 1939 World's Fair with this Chrysler film. Initially, it was filmed in black and white, and it was called In Tune with Tomorrow. And it proved to be so popular that for 1940, they reshot the whole thing in color.
Cool.
And replaced it in that theater. And that color version was restored several years ago by Bob Furmanek and Greg Kintz of the 3D Film Archive, and that's available on the first of their 3D Rarities collections.
Definitely buy these. You can see that
Now,
particular film. Yeah.
Another interesting little historical note about that 1939 World's Fair is that was also where the Sawyer's Company introduced the Viewmaster viewer. So 1939 was a big year for 3D. At the same World's Fair, you got 3D movies with polarized projection and the Viewmaster.
Wow. And yeah, the whole idea, and also the polarized. Don't we still use that today? And when people go to the movies?
Oh yeah. There's this gross misconception that continues to be pushed mostly in articles by people who haven't fully researched it, that red and blue glasses were used for 3D movies.
Right.
After 1939, 99% of the 3D movies that were made were shown using polarized projection.
Right.
And today, if you go to a theater, depending on which system they're using at the theater, if you go to a theater that says Real D, they're using polarized glasses, very, very similar to what was used in the 1980s and the 1950s and 1939. Although now with laser projection, if you go to a theater using Dolby Vision, they're actually using color filtering. That's a really, really high-tech version of this, that instead of being red on one side and blue on the other, has 3 wavelengths of red, green, and blue on one side, and 3 other wavelengths of red, green, and blue on the other side. So you get full color in each eye, but it's using color.
Wow.
So we're finally actually using colored glasses for 3D movies. But in the 1950s, they didn't use these for any of the feature films that came out, except for a few of the films that were intended for like non-English language theaters that weren't equipped for 3D. Then they would make a red and green print.
Right. Let's get to the Hollywood cartoons. I mean, we talked about Norman McLaren. There were a couple of other things. What year was that Owl and the Pussycat film?
There were a number of films that were produced for the Festival of Britain in 1951,
Uh-huh.
and that included the McLaren films. He did several
Oh,
experimental films where he filmed animation on an oscilloscope and was able to create these geometric shapes on an oscilloscope,
right.
and filmed left and right angles of those. Um, they were done for the National Film Board of Canada, and shown at the Festival of Britain. Um,
So, and so would that isn't there the Hallison Bachelor, Owl and the Pussycat? Am I
the,
mistaken?
yeah,
Is
yeah,
that correct? Yeah.
yes, yeah. Hallison Bachelor did an animated telling of the Owl and the Pussycat. Um,
And that was made
and
in
and
51,
here,
51? Yeah.
Owl and Pussycat. I'd have to check the date on that
Right.
one. Um, that one uh, isn't, as far as I know, it isn't currently available to be seen anywhere. It's in the vaults at the British Film Institute. Um, but there were several Hollywood produced
Yeah.
animated shorts. There was just about every major studio at the time, when the 3D craze hit at the end of 1952, and all the studios jumped in to make 3D movies in 1953. You had Warner Brothers, who, they jumped full into the 3D market. They created their own they hired the camera system that had been used on Buona Devil in 1952 to make House
Right.
of Wax. Then they created their own in-house 3D camera system to shoot feature films. But they did a Bugs Bunny cartoon in 3D,
Right.
Lumberjack Rabbit.
I'm personally of the impression that they and I could be wrong, but clearly it was released and made in 3D. But there's something about the film itself that it just doesn't look like they used it that much. They have the Warner Brothers Shield come out at the beginning. I don't want to say it was converted as you did with The Simpsons. I don't think that was the case. I think this was another
No.
cartoon. I personally think it was a cartoon in production just to be released flat, and then when 3D hit, they said, okay, let's make one that's already in hand, as opposed to making one from scratch. It would take another year to do it that
Well,
way.
I'll say they possibly had already developed the story and
Yeah.
uh, storyboards and layouts and whatnot. But in order to create a 3D cartoon in 1953, they didn't have the digital tools. They didn't
Right.
have the ability to do what I was doing. They had to do it all on their animation stand.
Right.
So what they would actually do, and keep in mind, they had limitations as to how many layers of acetate they could stack. So what they would do is they would figure out how to break down their artwork into however many layers they were going to have, and then they would photograph it on the animation stand for the left eye, and then they would shift the pegs to the right for things that they wanted to be receding, and shift the pegs to the left for things that they wanted coming forward, and refilm it for the other eye, and that would create the two images, the left and the right.
Did you? We saw the most, if not all, of the Hollywood cartoons during the 3D festivals that were here in LA a few years ago. And
Yeah, there was Universal did a Woody Woodpecker.
right.
There was a Popeye, Ace of Space, and Paramount did Casper the Friendly Ghost cartoon.
And also, the Disney did 2 cartoons as well.
Yeah,
If I had to make a list and someone said, what are the best ones in 3D? Honestly, I would pick the 2 from Paramount and Melody from Disney. I think those were the best. That really use it thoroughly throughout the cartoon. I don't see that
well, there's
as much on the other cartoons. I
there's
mean, they're
also,
certainly in 3D, but I don't see them using it.
Disney did 2 of them, but
Yeah.
as far as I recall, Working for Peanuts, the
Yeah.
Donald Duck Chip and Dale cartoon. I think that was the only one that was shown publicly in 3D.
Melody
I'm
wasn't.
not,
Melody was shown
I
publicly.
what was it?
Yeah.
Did they have that? Because
Yeah.
I know
There's.
Working for Peanuts was shown at Disneyland.
Yeah.
Um, uh,
And no, they were both, I think, released to theaters that wanted to play 3D. Melody was definitely shown because there's too much residue. What I mean by that is there's movie posters and press books and everything that tell you that it was in 3D. And plus, I mean, and we know they showed it later, of course, at Disneyland, as part of that
yeah.
wonderful Mickey Mouse Jamboree film, which is also one of the best 3D films I've ever seen. Um, but Melody, I mean, if you remember it, and I think you do, it's got like a surreal aspect to it, where
Oh
things
yeah,
are
yeah.
bouncing towards the screen. And what was the story on at the 3D festival?
Although
They showed a little test piece of the film done in a different technique. Do you know what I'm talking
yeah,
about? Do you
yeah.
remember that?
There were some experiments done in the 50s with a projection, well, a technique called a vectograph, which is, as I said, in order to show a 3D movie using polarized projection, you actually had to have two projectors in your projection booth running
Right.
simultaneously and in perfect synchronization.
Right.
If you threaded the projectors a frame off, it would completely screw up the presentation. Your audience would get a headache because you'd be seeing it out of time between the two eyes. If the projectors were out of alignment, you'd get a headache because we don't look up with one eye and down with the other. So there were a lot of ways to screw up 3D projection in the 50s. Vectographs were a method of creating a polarized 3D image on a single strip of film by having multiple layers on the film that were created using polarized dyes. So you
Wow.
could thread up one strip of film and the light from the projector would be polarized by the actual color dye.
Now,
And then and then
we know
you could
we
use,
saw a
yeah.
sample and it works. So why didn't that become the prevalent? Wouldn't that make sense to be the prevalent 3D if it
it
works?
it was it was not a practical technique to do
Oh,
for a film. They did some tests, and there were lots of still images created as vectographs. In fact, if you go to an eye doctor now and they do a stereo test, they still use this vectographic image of a housefly. They give you the glasses and you look at this card and they ask you if you can see the housefly. Um, but it was very difficult to produce them properly, and
wow.
as an experiment, it was interesting, but it wasn't a good way to actually make a movie.
Was it would it was it easier for them to do it and to test it using a Disney animated film that versus a live action film?
Um, I don't know what all of the specifics behind it would have been, but it it would kind of make sense that since Disney wanted to repurpose this for the theme park, that
Yeah.
Disney would have been looking at a way to reduce this down to fewer points of failure
Right.
because they were going to have it running all day every day.
Right.
So had they been able to come up with a practical way to produce these, that would have meant they could do it with a single projector and have it constantly running. So while I don't know for sure, that would be my guess.
Right.
Now, I should also mention there's a great moment in Working for Peanuts, the other Disney short. The premise is that Donald
Donald's
Duck
working at the
is
zoo.
he's a zookeeper,
Yeah,
and Chip
yeah.
and Dale they want all of the elephant's peanuts.
Right.
And there's a moment where the elephant is shooting peanuts out of his trunk at
I
Chip and
remember.
Dale, and they kind of went all in having the peanuts flying out of the screen.
Right.
So that's a fun moment in that one too.
We should mention somebody. I just looked at the chat, and I should be doing that more often. But somebody mentioned the infamous Telltale Heart, which I think we consider a lost 3D film.
Yeah, well, there's there's a lot of debate as to whether they actually filmed it in 3D or not. Um,
Oh,
there was there was definitely an intention, and depending on
who
who
you
you
talk
talk
to?
to,
Yeah. Well,
um,
I've talked to
there
T. Basusto, the son of the producer, who said as a
yes,
10-year-old he saw it in 3D.
yes,
Yeah.
um, and and the the interesting thing is that there was definitely 3D development happening, but um, no one's been able to find any actual production records
Yeah.
to show that it was actually done. So we don't know if his childhood memory is of actually seeing it in 3D or remembering it that way because they talked about it.
I still think
You
I've
know,
seen. I
like
still.
like like
Yeah.
like Berenstein or Berenstain Bears, you know?
I feel really bad that I feel like I've seen in my research, although I can't produce it. I don't have it. I don't know where it is. But I feel like I've seen a trade ad or an article. We'll have to get Don
Yeah.
Yelp on
Well,
this. We
well,
have to get
well,
somebody.
yes.
I have a feeling it was announced that it was
There
coming in 3D.
yeah, it was definitely being developed for 3D. Yeah, there were articles that list upcoming 3D pictures,
Mm-hmm.
and they listed it.
Ah,
But we have no evidence that it was actually shot that way.
all right.
And I mean, there were several pictures in the 50s that were planned for 3D, but not shot in 3D.
Right.
Perhaps the most notable is the sci-fi giant ant movie Them.
Oh, really? Uh-huh.
It was planned for 3D all the way up to the first day of
I
shooting,
did not know that. That's interesting. Yeah.
and apparently one of the because in order to shoot 3D, you had to a live action 3D, you had to have two cameras running at exactly the same time in perfect sync.
Right.
One shooting a left eye view, one shooting a right eye view, and apparently their 3D camera system broke down very right at the beginning of shooting anything for the movie. And there is a production note from the studio that says them will be shot flat.
That's a great note. Them will be shot
Yeah.
flat. It's like, no, that's
Yeah.
not bad English. We're just telling you that them will be shot.
Yeah.
We have a surprise for our audience. If our audience out there have any of these 3D glasses, or if you watch this later on a recording, you have time to go get one. What did we do here? You worked a little bit with Bob on the 3D rarities sets. And on the first one is a wonderful restoration by Bob and his team of Boo Moon, the Paramount Casper cartoon.
Casper short. Yeah.
The thing with the
Well, you know what?
Paramounts.
Here,
the-
I'm
the
gonna
thing-
I'm gonna switch my I'm gonna switch myself.
Okay, but
into
I wanna-
3D,
I
so
wanna
if anyone's
mention-
got glasses, they can.
Oh,
they
okay.
can test it
Oh, yeah.
now.
If you got 3D glasses, Eric is now in 3D. Um,
Yeah.
the Paramount ones are really good in 3D, and I think the audience that saw them at that festival noticed that. Both of them take place in outer space. I think they really thought about what would work with the 3D, and having
Yeah.
the space background with the characters in the forefront or spaceship or something really works, really plays well. Also, the Fleischer
Well, and
Studio, which famous studios Paramount was part of, they had experience with depth in films by doing those stereo optical, films in the 1930s with the 3D
with
sets.
the turntable,
Right.
Yeah, with the turntables.
So doing something dimensional.
Interesting
Go ahead.
interesting little side note. You can
Yeah.
take shots that were done on that turntable, and you can take subsequent frames and view them and see them in 3D.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I get it.
Since it's rotating,
Yeah.
you take frame 1 and frame 2, and
So you
actually
could
have
create
that
a 3D version of Somewhere in Dreamland or one of the cartoons from that period.
of of certain shots.
Yeah, but I said somewhere Dreamland
only
because it's like
yeah.
80% 3D shots. Yeah. There's something to that. Um,
Uh,
so
but
you
yes, the Fleischer Studio, particularly like if you watch the Casper Blue Moon short, you'll see they did something that the other studios didn't really do,
and that
which
is
was um, they as they animated things on these shifting pegs,
mm-hmm.
um, they they didn't just shift it from left position to right position. They actually changed the distance that they were shifting between left and right, which would effectively make things seem to be smoothly moving forward and backward through space. So I mean, I believe in the clip we're going to show, you'll see Casper appearing to float off the screen and into the audience.
Mm-hmm.
Which as you were saying, like if you watch the Woody Woodpecker cartoon or the Bugs Bunny cartoon, you don't see that kind of effect being used.
No, they really put a lot of effort and thought into these cartoons. It's hard to believe if you've, like me, grew up watching them flat on regular weekday television. Honestly, I don't really think that they're not too special, in my opinion. The 3D makes all the difference in these two cartoons. They're really visual spectaculars. We're not even going to be able to give you a good representation of that really right now. What did we do here, Eric? You have the version off of here, and you've converted it so that we could try to do it through the internet, right?
So as I said, when these were shown in theaters, they were in full color, using polarized projection. We can't do that through Zoom,
right?
So
right.
I've had to kind of dumb it down, if you will. While these were not used in the 1950s for movies, they were used extensively for things that were printed in books, magazines, and comic books. There were a lot of 3D comic books, and in fact,
we'll talk about that after we see
on
this
cartoon
clip.
Characters. But they would include anaglyph, color filtered glasses with the comic books. So it's a more primitive way to watch 3D. You don't get all the color resolution because you're only seeing red in one eye and you're only seeing the green and blue in the other eye. But for the sake of being able to let people at home get an idea of what the depth in this looks like, I've taken the left and the right and I've put them together into a red and cyan. So if you have 3D glasses, you'll want to put the red lens over your left eye to watch this.
Okay. Now, this is only the first minute. You're not going to see the cartoon. We're going to show you the first minute. If you want to see the cartoon, you got to buy Bob Furman X. Fantastic 3D Rarities Blu-ray. Beautifully restored. But let's take a look at that if we can. We'll see the first minute of Blue Moon. Okay. Full screen.
Gosh, I wish people wouldn't be scared of me.
That's it. That's it. You know what I like about that? I gotta readjust here. But a couple of things I like to point out to people. I mean, it's right in the beginning, not just the Paramount logo, which is something, a stereo tune, as you may have noticed, but the words "Boo Moon." I remember seeing that so many times as a kid, watching that cartoon. It's on all the public domain tapes. But in 3D, the Paramount copyright line is right in the front, right in front of us, and the Boo Moon it goes off into the distance. It's so cool. And then you get these shots of the skyline and over the credits, and every little bit of it is designed for 3D. I give them a lot of points. They knew what they were doing. Those two cartoons are really two of the best that they did in 3D. Thank you, Eric, for just converting that part for us. We have some more stuff, so don't put your glasses completely away. Let's talk quickly about comic books. And we had a trivia question we talked about yesterday.
Okay.
What was your trivia question about
Well, let me first give you a little bit of the background on 3D comic books, because they actually hit right around the same time as the 3D movie craze.
Right.
There was a comic book artist team named Joe Kubert and Norman Maurer.
Yep.
And Joe and Norman got this idea to produce 3D comic books. In fact, Norman actually, he and his brother Leonard came up with the idea based on what they were seeing in the movies, that they could create comic books by using the animation cell technique, where they create the artwork on multiple layers of cells, and then photostat that for the left eye, and then shift the pegs and create a right eye version, and then print on the page with the left eye in one color and the right eye in the other color, red and green or red and blue. Include the glasses with the comic book, and kids everywhere could read their comics in 3D. So they actually
what was the first comic book printed in 3D?
This was the first comic book printed in 3D.
There it is. You have it. The Mighty Mouse, Terry Toons. Yeah. And that was the first one. And I heard, I'm under the impression it was like a huge sensation, that comic book, wasn't it?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, here, let me show you what a 3D page from this comic book looks like.
And if we put on our glasses, will we be able to see it in 3D?
Yeah, you will. I just need to. You know what? I'll have to load it up. So give me a second to get to it.
So Kubert and Moorer came out with that, and from what I understand, it was huge.
They developed a process. They called it Illustereo, like illustrated stereo.
Right.
Patent pending Illustereo.
Right.
And what they did, they approached every comic book publisher in New York. New York was where all the comic book companies were.
Right.
And gave demonstrations of their Illustereo process. And several comic book companies were very interested. You had EC Comics, that Bill Gaines was actually quite interested. And what ended up happening was Kubert and Maurer had been working with Archer St. John and his publishing company.
Right.
Which
St. John. Yeah.
St. John's.
Yeah. They did the Terry Toon comics regularly.
They did the Terry Toon comics regularly. And apparently getting interest from Bill Gaines at EC was just a way for them to get leverage with Archer St. John to have him pay them to do a 3D comic book.
And just just off the top of my head, I can recall that DC and Harvey did 3D comics.
Yes.
And EC did at least one 3D comic book, I believe.
Well, yeah, there's a story there that if we have time, I'll get to. But yeah, what ended up happening was they went into production on a couple of 3D comic books for St. John's. Because they had already been doing Terry Toons comics. Mighty Mouse was kind of a done deal.
Right.
But it wasn't intended to be the first 3D comic book. And this will lead to my trivia question.
Okay.
So if you know the answer, you can put it in the chat. And
very good.
What is the connection between Mighty Mouse and Moe from the Three Stooges?
And if you answer this question correctly, according to Eric, now let's not fight about it, the first person only, you will win a special Cartoon Research Podcast No Prize of a real pack, an authentic pack of Herman and Catnip trading cards. This is a very limited edition. It's only for people who really care about Herman and Catnip, and so we'll find out. We'll mail that to you. You winner, whoever you are. But the question again is, Eric, what is the question?
Yeah, the question is, what is the 3D connection between Mighty Mouse and Moe from the Three Stooges?
That's the question? What is the question? What is the...
Well,
I thought the question might be...
Well, there's a corollary to that. There's a
Okay.
corollary to that, yes. There's a simple answer, but there's a complicated answer, and I think they need to know the complicated answer.
Well, wait a minute. Wait.
Eric.
Eric. I think the question is, and I could be wrong. You correct me if I'm wrong. The question is, wasn't the question, what is the Three Stooges and 3D? Remember we were talking about this last night? That there was...
Yeah, well, what's the connection between Mighty Mouse and 3 generations of Moe Howard's family?
That's the question. What's the connection between Mighty Mouse and 3 generations of Moe Howard's family? Okay, I'm not sure if I know all the answers myself, but why don't you give us the answers, Eric? I'm not even going to. I should just check, though,
Sure.
if anybody here in the chat room has anything. Ooh. All right. Go on, Eric.
Okay, well, in 1953, when this 3D craze hit, one of the studios that jumped on the bandwagon was Columbia.
Right.
And, of course, Columbia was already in the business of making Three Stooges short subjects.
Right.
So they actually made 2 Three Stooges 3D shorts.
Right.
And I should probably do this right and say they did 2 Three Stooges 3D shorts. I'll do that again so people on Twitch
do it again.
They did 2.
That's great.
Three Stooges 3D shorts.
Right out of that's an eye poke right out of Spooks, which would be one of those shorts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The first one was called Spooks, and the second one was called Pardon My Backfire.
Right.
So
that's Moe Howard. Moe Howard in 3D #1.
Yeah, Moe was in 2 excellent 3D shorts at Columbia.
Yeah.
So, at St. John's, I mentioned Joe Kubert and Norman Maurer.
Right.
Norman,
the cartoonists behind
the 3D
behind
3D
comics.
Mighty Mouse. Here's a page from that 3D Mighty Mouse.
Okay.
Um, well, Norman's wife Joan was Moe's daughter. So Norman was Moe's son-in-law.
Norman Moore was Moe's son-in-law. So, and I believe that they did 3D Three Stooges comics.
Yes, as a matter of fact, they did.
There you go. You have an actual copy.
I have an actual copy, and yes, the Three Stooges.
That leads me to wonder why. It leads me to wonder why the Three Stooges 3D comic wasn't the first. You'd think that would be.
Yeah, you would, and you would actually be right to think that, because the Three Stooges comic was intended to be the first. Norman was planning a Three Stooges comic, but just the way that the publishing cycle went and the way the release schedule went, the Three Stooges ended up being the second one.
Very cool. And then wait, so there's a third connection to the Stooges and 3D.
There is, and 3D, and it's something pioneering, and it has to do with animation.
Okay, remind me.
In 1985, there was an independently produced animated feature film.
Right.
Called Star Chaser: The Legend of Orin.
Star Chaser: The Legend of Orin.
Legend of Orin, which was the first feature-length animated 3D movie, hand-drawn animated
movie. Yeah.
There had been shorts, but there hadn't been a feature prior to Star Chaser.
And by the way, I've seen it recently in 3D, and it's pretty good. My initial reaction to that movie was, back in the day, in 1985 or whatever, that it felt like a 3D He-Man cartoon.
Well, I'll tell you,
it's better than that, actually.
the character animation is maybe just a step better than Filmation.
Yeah.
But the spaceship scenes, the space battles are outstanding.
They are.
And,
the whole thing, even the story is good. Yeah. It's good. It's a good movie, in my opinion.
The story's very much a Star Wars knockoff.
Yeah.
You know, you've got the cigar smoking rogue pilot. You got the androids. You've got lights, weapons. I think they were whips instead of swords. But for the spaceships, they went with a very interesting technique. You remember the Filmation Flash Gordon series?
Right, I think I know where you're going. It's where they would film a live action model. Yeah.
They filmed live action models and then they rotoscoped, right?
Right.
Well, Star Chaser was 1985, so it came out a few years after Tron. And Bill Croyer was involved in the spaceship scenes. They figured maybe we could use computer animation for the spaceships. But back in those days, you needed to have like a Cray supercomputer and, months and months to render if you wanted to have even the crudest looking color computer graphics.
Right.
But what Bill figured out was they could design all the spaceship scenes as wireframe and then use a pen plotter to draw it on paper, and then send those drawings to ink and paint. So you actually have perfect computer drawn spaceships.
Right.
That movie.
Right. He did he used that technique in his movie Fern Gully that he directed. He also used that. In fact, I think that technique, tell me if I'm wrong, was that technique used in Iron Giant? Iron Giant? I think, or no, when the Iron Giant scenes.
In the Iron Giant scenes, they were using, it was all digital. They were creating CG models, and then they were using a rendering system that they called Gartoons. It was programmed by a guy named Brian Gardner that would take what they had done as a CG model and create a hand-drawn, rendered-looking version of it. But to get to our
Yes.
trivia question,
Oh yes.
Star Chaser, The Legend of Orin
Yes.
was written by prolific animation writer Jeffrey Scott,
Aha.
whose given name is Jeffrey Maurer, and his parents are Norman and Joan. So he's Moe's grandson.
There you go. So Mo Howard, in some ways, pioneered at least two, or in some, his relations.
Yeah. Mo was 3 generations of Moe's family were pioneers in the field of 3D.
Perfect for the Three Stooges. Three Stooges 3D.
The 3D Stooges.
3D Stooges.
And while we're on the Three Stooges, something else I just wanted to point out that I've always found kind of interesting. In 1953, when the comic books came out, and you can see in this image, it's Larry, Moe, and Shemp.
Right.
Well, in I believe it was the 1990s, they did new versions of the Three Stooges comic books, where they actually went back to the 1950s stories and reprinted them.
Mm-hmm.
But they went in, and everywhere they had Shemp, they replaced him with Curly.
Wow.
So that's the same page,
That's cool.
but they've replaced Shemp with Curly.
I'll have to check that out. Speaking of St. John comics. Oh, okay, go ahead.
Yes. And the comic books were huge all over the world for a very brief period of time.
Yeah.
This is the Three Stooges comic book in Portuguese for Brazil
Wow. From 1953?
from 1953.
Cool. I've never seen a foreign version. That's pretty neat.
And you were going to ask.
Well, I was
something
going to
about
allude
St.
to.
John?
Well, I wanted to move things along. I wanted to talk about St. John, but particularly Terry Toons.
Okay.
Now, when we talk about the classic old cartoons, we mentioned Bugs Bunny was in 3D, Woody Woodpecker, Donald Duck, Casper, and Popeye, but none of the Terry Toons were done in 3D as animated cartoons back in those days. But you have discovered that Paul Terry tried to innovate something with 3D using his animation studio that most people haven't heard of. For the record, we wrote about this on Cartoon Research, a blog post about this like 7 years ago or something like that. You can all look up later. But let's talk about it with Eric right now. Eric, tell me how you discovered or you even found out about what we call the Terry scopes.
The Terry scope, yes.
Yes.
Well, because of the Mighty Mouse 3D comic books, Paul Terry was familiar with the process that they had used to take the comic book art, putting it on cells, shifting them to the left and the right to create left and right 3D versions. Now, that the 3D movie craze and the 3D comic book craze were very short-lived. 3D movies hit at the end of '52 and were pretty much done by the beginning of 1954. 3D comic books hit at the end of the summer of 1953 and were done within a couple months. In fact, it pretty much broke St. John's Company. There were a number of lawsuits. Bill Gaines at EC sued Archer St. John and Kubert and Maurer. And St. John had tried to corner the market on acetate cells in New York and ended up bankrupting the company.
Wow.
When 3D comic books stopped selling. So 3D kind of came and went pretty quickly. But Paul Terry apparently was such a fan of the process. And in fact, Paul Terry gave a deposition as a character witness in the trial between EC and St. John's. But that's a story for another time. Terry had this idea in early 1955. And let me see if I can
In
quote him.
55.
In 55, yeah. I'm always on the lookout. I mentioned at the very beginning that I have a museum of 3D in Los Angeles.
Right.
And so I'm always looking for unique and interesting 3D artifacts to put in the museum. And
Sourpuss rely on hunting.
No.
Oh, no, not yet.
No. Don't.
Not yet.
Yeah, okay. And we don't want, that's not going to
So-
be the next clip anyway. It's the machine. We're going to look at the machine. Okay? Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So, so I saw a listing in an auction that said
No.
Mighty Mouse.
No. Okay. Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
I saw a listing in an auction that said Mighty Mouse 3D viewer, and this was the picture.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this really crude-looking cabinet with like spray-painted logos.
Yeah, it's
I'd
pretty,
never seen anything like this.
pretty funky.
And the listing for it said shows 4 Mighty Mouse cartoons like a Viewmaster, or four cartoons like a Viewmaster. Has a tape to play sound, but that doesn't work. The pictures work about 80% of the time. I don't know anything else about it. And I was just like, I've never seen this before. I don't know what this is. But I had to bid on it just to get this thing. And I won the auction. I received this thing, and I opened the door and look inside, and sure enough, it's got. Well, maybe now would be a good time to show what's inside.
Okay. Do you have that?
It's a coin operated
inside the
viewer.
machine, Terryscope? Hang on.
Let's take a look under the hood. As you can see, there's 2 film strips, one for each eye, and they run on a metal belt past the lenses. The film is backlit as it runs, and you get to see the images in 3D. Now, in the bottom compartment, there's a tape drive with an endless loop tape. And that tape runs the audio in synchronization with the picture, so you can see and hear the cartoon. And when it operates, this is how it works.
Cool. Neat.
So
Wow.
I was kind of, I'd never seen anything like this before. I couldn't find any information about who might have made it. And then I noticed on the inside of the door, it said property of Terrytoons. So
Wow.
at that point, I believe I called you and I said,
Me?
Hey,
Yeah.
hey, Jerry, have you ever heard of a 1950s era coin-operated 3D viewer that includes 2 Mighty Mouse film strips, a Gandy Goose and Sourpuss, and a Heckle and Jekyll? And you were silent. You were silent for like a good 15, 20 seconds. And I remember the next thing you said was, "Can I come over?"
Yeah.
And
yeah.
you came by to take a look at it and said, "Well, I've heard of something called a Terryscope, but I've never seen one." And you said, "I thought it was a booth you sat in,
Right.
but I don't know. That was later. That was like
Yeah.
60s or 70s. So maybe this from the 50s was a Terryscope." But that gave me enough information to do some research. And I actually found an interview with Paul Terry that was in the June 1928, 1955 issue of the Traverse City Record Eagle from Traverse City, Michigan, where they interviewed Paul Terry about his 50 years as a cartoonist, how he created his characters in Mighty Mouse, how he had found a new market in television, where he saw the future of animation. And they asked him, what do you think is the future? And I'll quote him here. Paul Terry said, he's working on the Terryscope. He said it's a new entertainment medium. It's something like a jukebox, but not quite. It's also something like those motion picture Nickelodeons you see in penny arcades, but not quite. What I've done is taken the principle of these Nickelodeons and put into them Mighty Mouse cartoons in color and 3D along with sound. We're leasing them to supermarkets and amusement parks. Owners of supermarkets have found them to be excellent kitty catchers. While Mama goes shopping, the kitties remain in a boxed-off area looking into the Terryscope. And, okay, so that's what I have. It's like a jukebox and a Nickelodeon 3D viewer. You drop in your dime, and you get to see a minute-long Terrytoons story.
And I want to mention... Go ahead.
That like this cabinet was so crudely built. The top of it is like clearly, I don't know if you could tell from the picture that I showed, but like the top of the cabinet is an old kitchen countertop. It's a Formica kitchen countertop from 1955. The whole thing looks like someone like pulled down a kitchen cabinet and figured out how to shove a stereoscope into it.
Now you found other people, or you found other machines. You found several other ones, right?
Yeah. So I went hunting, and I found that several years before I got this Terryscope, there had been another one at auction, and it was definitely not the one that I had. This one was on the East Coast. It was apparently in the New York area, and you can see very similarly built, but it's painted green.
Right.
Same kind of cheap stenciling, but it also had a marquee on it that listed the 4 cartoons that were in it.
Cool.
And the 4 cartoons in this Terryscope are different from the 4 cartoons that were in my Terryscope. So I know that they made at least 8 film strips for these things.
And here's where I want to mention that a few weeks or a few months after you showed me this for the first time, that I was visiting our friends Mike Van Eaton at the Van Eaton Gallery here, and he was showing me. He said, "Have you ever seen Terrytoon artwork that looks like this?" And he was showing me these cells and backgrounds that were clearly in the shape, not for animation, no peg holes, to be under a camera, but they were clearly in the shape of this Terryscope artwork. And I think, is that what happened? Did I send you over to him, or what happened next?
You sent me over there, and I took a look at them, and he'd already sold one of them. He'd actually sold. He had one that was. If you look at the top left here, it's Mighty Mouse flying toward a volcano.
Right.
He had that cell. He'd sold that one already. But he had several others. He had, I don't have those queued up, but I could dig them up when we have a moment to bring up here to show. He had one of Gandy Goose and Sourpuss watching two dinosaurs fighting each other.
Right.
He had a close-up of the volcano that Mighty Mouse was flying toward, and I was able to get those from the Van Eaton Gallery, and they are on display at the museum.
Right. So at the museum, you have the original art for a few of them on display. Plus, you have an actual your Terryscope machine, which somebody could put a dime in or something and watch.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
what?
It's fully operational. When I got it, it had some problems. I had to clean the lenses, replace the light, and the sound mechanism wasn't working at all. When you saw it, it didn't have sound.
Right.
But I contacted a guy in Canada who was an expert on old tape decks, and I sent him pictures, and he wrote back and he said he was astounded. He said it looks like a Mackenzie tape loop, and he said they weren't commercially available until late 1956 or 57. So he said that looks like a prototype of a Mackenzie tape loop. He said in 1955, probably the only other person who maybe was using them was Walt Disney to have repeating things at Disneyland. But apparently Paul Terry was able to get a few of these tape loops and put them in the machine. I asked him, how do I get it working? And he said the big problem with a lot of those old tape decks is that the rubber rollers get rotted. If he said it looks like everything else is good, if the motors are running, but the tape isn't moving, you probably just need to do something to revive the rubber rollers. So I was able to treat the rubber rollers to get enough grip to run the tape.
Wow.
And he said, my advice to you is get it so that it's working, run that tape through, re-record it, and then never play that tape again.
Right. And you did that?
So,
is that what you did?
So that's what I did. I was able to digitally record the audio playing that tape through. And once I had digital files of the audio, I just added a little circuit board to the machine so that when it triggers the light to play back the film, it triggers the sound just like it would have.
And so when you look at it through the Terryscope, it's polarized, right? Polarized lenses.
Well, it's not even polarized. You're actually seeing it like you would if you looked into a ViewMaster. The left and the right are two separate images, and you're looking through two separate lenses. So you see two discrete images, one in your left eye and one in your right eye, because it's actually two separate strips of film, and it's very much like, you know, if I look into a viewer, I've got two lenses, and if I put one picture in front of this one and I put one picture in front of this one, each eye will see a different picture.
Right. And so you've captured the picture and soundtrack and put it together as a separate file so that we could watch it, right? And you've also converted it for red and cyan.
I've made them so that we can watch them here.
Oh, okay, good.
And so you'll be able to wear the glasses same as we did.
So
before.
this would be 4 rare Terry tunes that nobody's ever seen.
And again, very much like looking at a ViewMaster with sound. Right. There's still images that play in sequence.
Right. There's still images. Right.
And you have to think, I mean, this was an interesting money-making venture that Paul Terry was looking into.
Embarked on in 1955. And then he gave up and sold the whole studio to CBS is what happened.
Near as I can tell, I've only actually found photos of 3 Terryscopes, including my own.
Right.
There's that green one it's in a private collection in the New York area. After I published pictures, I was actually contacted by a 3D collector in Chicago who sent me pictures of what he has, and he said, "Thank you so much for putting pictures up because now I know what I have."
Huh. And I encourage everyone who owns a Terryscope out there to do what Eric did and to somehow capture the sound and picture so that we can all enjoy them. That's what I'd like to see.
Now, yeah, this one in Chicago.
Yeah.
He told me he has the same 4 cartoons that are in mine.
Okay.
And at some point, the sound mechanism was removed. He doesn't even have it.
Oh.
So he had never even gotten his working. He had no idea what it was, but he ended up opening it up to take pictures to show me, and wiped all the dust off the inside and found the stamp that said "Property of Terrytoons."
Ah, I wonder how many of those ever played in any real arcade, or if they were just samples, I'd like to think they were. I'd like to think one of them was at least in an arcade somewhere. You know,
I received an email through my website, and here's the message. I actually have this here because I thought you might like this. I received a message from a gentleman named John Samuel, who says, "I just watched your video on YouTube regarding the Terryscope. When I was a kid in the 1960s and 70s, the Keensburg amusement park in Keensburg, New Jersey had one of these."
Wow.
He says, "I looked forward to going there so I could watch it. Now the amusement park is still in operation, but the last time I was there, the Terryscope was no longer there. Perhaps someone may know where it went." And I suspect that's the one in the private collection in the New York area.
That's
now.
what I think. Yeah. Because that's so that even just the marquee of it is so hand done, like by an artist at the studio. It doesn't, you know what I mean? It's not mass produced. It doesn't have that feel to it.
And I've been told by one other person that they remember seeing a Terryscope at an amusement park.
Really?
And they remember the volcano. So it may have been that same one, but at this point, I have only been able to find hard evidence of 3 of them, and maybe the existence of a 4th if this one in New Jersey was another one.
And the artwork that you got from Van Eaton, does it go to any of the films that you have, or no?
It doesn't go to the ones that I have, but it does go to the ones that are in New York.
Ah. All right, let's put our glasses on. Let's take a look. That's the red over the left eye, right? And
yes, red over the left eye.
Mauricio, if you may, you can start with Mighty Mouse, and if you can run all 4 in a row, that would be great. If not, we'll talk about each one, however we can do it.
Mighty Mouse was flying by the planet Mars when all at once a fleet of strange spaceships with cat-like pilots flashed by. "They're heading toward Earth. This looks like an attack," he thought, quickly diving after them. While overtaking one of the ships, a blinding ball of light struck Mighty Mouse full in the chest. And as he fell, the invaders struck at the mouse citizens with full force. "Help! Help! Is there no one who can save us?" they cried. Just then, Mighty Mouse landed on the live wires of a telephone line, and the sudden shock brought him to. Ripping up a telephone pole with his bare hands, he charged at his attackers, and in no time sent them hurtling back into space with powerful blows of his huge club. "Mighty Mouse, our hero!" cheered the mice. "This way to the circus!" cried Barker Bill. "I say, let's sneak in under here," said Jekyll to Heckle. No sooner had they gotten inside than Barker Bill spotted them. "Run for it, chum!" cried Heckle, and they dove for the nearest hiding place and scrambled to what seemed like safety. But before they knew it, boom went the cannon, and the magpies were shot toward the top of the tent. And was the trapeze performers surprised when they each grabbed a leg? "Dear me, what'll we do now?" cried Jekyll as they hung on for dear life. "I'll take care of that," said the trapeze performer, giving them a lusty kick, which sent them splashing into the seal tank. The audience roared with laughter at their antics as Barker Bill offered them a job as clowns. "We're paying guests from now on," said Heckle. Gandy Goose and Sourpuss were lion hunting. "I'll use you as bait," said Sourpuss, "but don't worry. If a lion comes, blow this bugle and I'll be ready with my gun." Pretty soon a lion did come, and poor Gandy blew and blew. But Sourpuss was sound asleep. Then the lion made a vicious lunge at Gandy, but missed and bit the rope in half. "Help! Help!" cried the frightened goose as he climbed up to Sourpuss with the lion at his heels. The heavy beast made the tree bend way over, causing him to lose his grip. And as he fell, the tree snapped back and shot the hunter to safety. "Wow, that was close," said Gandy. "I'll never be lion bait again." Deep in the forest, a happy gypsy band is camped for the night as they watch the gypsy princess dance by firelight. But little do they know that in a dark cave nearby, a band of evil bats are planning an attack. Suddenly, one little gypsy looks up and cries, "Here they come!" As the caravan tries vainly to escape, the giant bats swoop down upon them. And the little gypsy princess soon finds herself in the clutches of the bat leader. But Mighty Mouse, ever on the alert, flashes down through the sky with the speed of a jet-propelled plane. Striking a mighty blow, he releases the helpless maiden as the attackers flee in fright. Then, just in the nick of time, he saves the falling princess from the jaws of a hungry crocodile. Mighty Mouse wins again.
Is that it? Is that it? I want more. Oh, I want more.
Well, that's all four of what I've got.
Those are great. Those are really, really, artwork is fantastic. And anyway, let me take this off. Wow. Eric, unfortunately, that's going to be our podcast for today. For the most part, I mean, we can sum up, but
well, let me close by showing you a picture that I think sums all this up.
Okay.
This is a piece that was drawn for Rayzone by Joe Kubert that I now have in the museum. The title of this original artwork is "On the Birth of 3D Comics." And if you can see that, it's a self-portrait of Joe Kubert and Norman and Leonard Maurer at the drawing table, creating all of the characters for their 3D comic books.
Love it.
Mighty Mouse to their right and the Three Stooges to their left.
As a Joe Kubert fan, a fan of his DC, Sergeant Rock, and many other comics he did, Hawkman and things like that, to see him do Mighty Mouse is pretty cool. But also everything there is cool. Tour, oh, it's great. It's great. It's great. You should give everybody one more. How would they, if they came to LA, or if they're in LA, and if they somehow wanted to come to your museum, what would they do? You have a website, 3D Space?
Yeah. In fact, if people want to learn about the museum, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We survive entirely on the generosity of people who come and visit the museum. And you can actually go to our website at la3d.space and check out our website to learn more about the museum. You can sign up to be on our email list. We have a Patreon if you'd like to support us, and even if you just want to get 3D glasses, we have plenty of 3D glasses, and we're always happy to send them out to people.
And if you go to the museum, you get to see those periscopes we just looked at in full color, in full 3D for real, and in
addition, as well as the cells that are framed and up on the wall, and sometime if you'd like, we can have another conversation about Viewmasters and all the cartoons that made their way to Viewmaster.
All those cool sculptures of Huckleberry Hound and the Flintstones and all that other stuff. I mean, there's so much because the Viewmasters.
Well,
We'll
Funny
talk
that you
about that,
mentioned
but
the Flintstones.
Viewmasters as a commercial product
you
for
haven't-
kids.
You haven't seen them, but I have a number of the original clay figures at the museum.
Oh, really?
I have a Fred, I have a Barney, I
Oh.
have some elephants from Jungle Book. Yeah, you'll have to
Oh.
come by sometime.
What? But as a commercial product aimed at children, really, although not really, actually, now that I think about it. But when was the Viewmaster thing? It was like, when did that start? Like the late '40s into the certainly into
Well,
the
yeah. It was
80s.
introduced at that 1939 World's Fair.
Ah, right.
And initially it was a travel souvenir. You know, you would go to the
Right.
Grand Canyon and you could get the travel reel. And then 1941, World War II, the U.S. enters World War II. And so through all of wartime, the Viewmaster was actually a military training tool.
Wow.
And then post-war, the Sawyer's Company went back into the travel market, but they also expanded into entertainment.
Right.
And they bought one of their biggest competitors, a company called TrueView.
Yes.
Because TrueView had a contract to do 3D film strips based on Disney characters.
Ah.
And Sawyer's bought out TrueView, and Viewmaster was actually their high-end product, and they continued a viewer called a TrueView for kids, and then eventually merged it all together.
Right. So so Disney was the first kind of aimed at children.
There had been some Viewmasters for kids prior to that, mostly based on fairy tales, because those are public domain stories, and they had in-house artists who would, sculpt.
And we're getting way into it, but where was
Yeah,
that
yes.
art studio? Was it in Hollywood?
No, they were based in the Portland, Oregon area.
All right, to be continued. I think
So
is
yeah,
what
yeah,
we need
we'll,
to do.
we'll
Yeah.
we'll have to talk Viewmaster another
Yeah,
time.
definitely. All right. Well, once again, Eric, thank you for being with us this time, and thank you, my audience out there, whoever you are, and we'll see you online with cartoons at the Cartoon Research Twitch. Spread the word, and thank you all, and that's our show for today. Thanks.